Hi everyone. In our previous video, we discussed that how to access the command line interface of a switch or a router. So one of the methods we discussed that we can just connect a console cable and we can get connected to the switch. And second method was that if we are if you are somehow away from the router or a switch and we want to access this switch remotely at some distance, then we have a method of telnet and we have also a method of secure shell. But for that, we need to assign an IP address to the switch or a router. So in our case, this is a switch. And to assign an IP address to the switch, in our previous video, we discussed the static IP address, or at least we assigned the IP address statically. So what specifically we did, so this is there just to remind you, just we went to the virtual LAN interface, VLAN interface of the switch here with this command, and then we assign an IP address to that interface of the switch. Okay, so this is known as static IP address because we as an administrator are going to assign this specific or fixed IP address to the switch, or it can be a router or a computer. So this is static, fixed. We have another method as well. So that method is called DHCP based IP address. So what happens in this DHCP based IP address? So in that case, we have a computer, a machine. So I have just for illustration purpose, I have shown a person. And that machine or that computer or that a router who will act as a DHCP server or DHCP who will be giving us the IP address. So that machine will have a list of IP addresses. And that machine specifically is known as DHCP server. And when a client, any client, for example, this switch, when a client will ask for some IP address from this DHCP server, DHCP will look into the availability of those IP addresses and then will take any of the IP address from this pool. So this is known as pool. From this pool, any one of the IP address will be assigned to the client who is requesting for the IP address. So this is DHCP. So we are going to learn the second method, that how to configure the switch to request for an IP address from the DHCP server. So we are not discussing this part of the scenario. We will discuss only this part, only the client side of this situation. So what we do, we will go to the switch and we will configure it to get an IP address from DHCP server. And for that, what we do, the same command. So the first command you can see the same. We will go to the virtual LAN interface of the switch, and then in this static IP address you can see we just use IP address and we assigned an IP address by ourselves. But now in this case, after IP address, we are saying that please request DHCP server for the IP address. So now instead of giving an IP address statically, we are configuring the switch that it will ask the DHCP server for some specific IP address. Okay, so this is the only difference. But now any of the IP address which will be available in the pool of DHCP server can be assigned to the switch or to the router or to a computer. Okay, so with this concept, let's do the same thing in packet tracer, Cisco packet tracer. Now we are in the Cisco packet tracer, and this is our DHCP server. Okay, so I have configured this DHCP server already. If you want to configure it by yourself, you can use these commands. Otherwise, when the topic will come, then I'll discuss the DHCP server in the details. But at the moment, we are not discussing the DHCP server configuration, but only the client side. We are discussing only the client side. So at the moment, we want a switch to be configured to use the DHCP server to get an IP address. Then we select a switch from this, network devices, and then switch, select any switch and put it there. Okay, and then we need a connection, so click on connection. Different devices we use straight through, and this is gigabit, so this gigabit is connected with the gigabit of this router. And remember, we have configured that interface of the router. You can see from this configuration. Okay, so we have connected this with the router. So router at the moment is acting as a DHCP server for us, and now we want to configure this switch. So we want to configure this switch in such a way that this switch should request for an IP address from this server. Okay, so go to global configuration mode. So config key, we are in the global configuration mode, and then we need to go to interface VLAN 1 and then IP address. And now instead of assigning a static IP address, we just write here DHCP. Okay, and then as usual we use the command of no shutdown. So in this way, this interface will be active administratively. It will be up, so no shutdown, and that's done. And now you can see, as soon as we are finished, this switch has received an IP address that is 192.168.10.6 with this mask. So switch has got the IP address from the DHCP, and this has been done dynamically. We haven't assigned the IP address ourselves to the switch. So this has been done dynamically. Okay. So Control Z, and we are in privilege mode. If you want to see what happened, then we can just use the command of show DHCP lease. So it will give us the details about the DHCP lease. And to make it readable, let's maximize it. And you can see with this command, we can see that temporary IP address. This is the temporary IP address which has been assigned to the switch. And this has been assigned to VLAN 1, and this is the server, DHCP server. So rest of the details is there, but at the moment for us the important thing is that the switch has received an IP address from the DHCP server. So just we discuss the client side of this scenario. Okay, now for instance, I'm going to close it. Now for instance, I'm going to delete this switch, save it. Now for example, we want one computer to get an IP address dynamically from this router, which is acting as a DHCP server. So we take a computer from here, this, and computer. So we have a Gigabit Ethernet interface here, but we don't have here. So we need a switch. So take a switch from here. So here, and this is switch. Take a switch here, and then we need a straight through connection from here. So this is fast Ethernet, and from here the fast Ethernet interface, and then again straight through cable and Gigabit Ethernet, and at this side as well Gigabit Ethernet to match the interfaces. Now they have been connected. Now we want this computer to get an IP address. So at the moment you can see there is no IP address assigned to this computer. What we do, click here, click desktop, IP address, and here if you want to assign an IP address statically to this computer, then you can write whatever IP address you like this. So you can write it here. But at this time we want an IP address to be assigned to this computer dynamically. Then we just click here, DHCP, and it is requesting for IP address, and this you can see DHCP request successful, and the IP address which has been assigned to this computer is 192.168.10.7. So what happened? This computer has requested an IP address from the DHCP server, and DHCP server has assigned one of the IP addresses which was available with it in its pool, in IP pool. From that IP pool, that server selected one IP address and it assigned to the computer. So this is how the IP addresses can be assigned dynamically to a switch, to a router, to a computer. The complete responsibility is on the DHCP server, and we will configure and we'll explain it later on. But if you're interested, then these are some commands which I can put in the description section as well. But we have discussed only the client side. So on the client side of a switch, so how to configure the switch to get an IP address from the DHCP server, and how to configure this, maybe this computer to get an IP address from the DHCP server. So we can assign an IP address using static method, and then is DHCP method that is known as dynamic host configuration protocol. So by using that protocol as well, we can assign. So the job of DHCP is to assign the IP addresses to the nodes on the computer network. That can be router, switch, or a computer. And that has to be done dynamically. So that's it for today, and thank you.